In a quaint little town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, lived a boy named Oliver. He was an ordinary child with an ordinary life, filled with mundane routines that consisted of school, friends, and bedtime stories. He lived with his parents in a cozy house adorned with vibrant flowers in the garden and a small wooden swing hanging from a sturdy oak tree. Oliver loved playing outside, riding his bicycle down the winding roads, and exploring every nook and cranny of his neighborhood with his friends, Noah and Mia. But one fateful night, everything changed. As the moon shone brightly in the sky, illuminating the world with its silvery glow, a chilling feeling settled into Oliver's room. He couldn't quite grasp what was wrong, but a sense of foreboding crept over him like a thick mist. The wind howled softly outside, rustling the leaves of the trees and causing shadows to dance across his bedroom walls. Something was different about that night. It was supposed to be a night like any other. He remembered his bedtime routine well, brushing his teeth while twirling his toothbrush in the sink, reading a few pages of a storybook, and then snuggling under his covers. However, tonight, as he settled into bed, he could see a shadow forming in the far corner of his bedroom. It appeared as a dark patch against the pale shade of his walls. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of his tired eyes or the odd angle made by his desk lamp. However, as he focused, the shadow pulsated slightly, growing and shrinking as if it were alive. It was as if the dark was breathing, and Oliver's heart raced. Was it just a figment of his imagination, or was something lurking, hidden from view? Determined to confront the dark, Oliver reached for the desk lamp and flicked it on. The warm light filled the room, banishing shadows and sending the dark blot retreating into the corner. Breathing a sigh of relief, he pulled the covers tightly around him as if they would protect him from whatever lurked within that shadow. However, as he lay back, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still there, lurking and waiting for the light to dim again. As the minutes passed and the comforting sounds of the night whispered around him, Oliver's imagination started to race. Maybe it was just a harmless creature, like a raccoon or an owl that had wandered into his room. But, as those thoughts fluttered away like whispers in the wind, something deep inside him felt different. He felt like a detective, bravely investigating a mysterious case that needed to be solved. His eyes darted across the room, searching for signs of anything unusual. As night turned into dawn, the shadow seemed to retreat and vanish with the morning light, but not without leaving a haunting impression on Oliver's mind. The next day started off as normal as it could be. He went to school, where he sat at his favorite desk, eagerly raising his hand in class to share stories from his weekend. He played soccer during recess with Noah, running back and forth on the grassy field, the sun warming his skin, and laughed with Mia as they traded snacks. But as the sun began to set and the familiar blanket of night crept in, Oliver felt the excitement of the day fade into a gnawing dread. That night, once again, he sensed a chilling breeze creeping into his room, making him shiver. As the clock struck 8, the shadow returned, this time larger and more menacing, engulfing the light around it as if it were siphoning away his comfort. It loomed ominously, filling him with an overwhelming sense of fear. With trembling hands, Oliver tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was merely his imagination running wild. But deep inside, he felt it growing, an unsettling presence that seemed to crawl toward him with every passing minute. Each night, the dark patch expanded, its edges jagged like the claws of a grotesque creature, eager to settle into his world. The lines of the shadow twisted and turned like the winding trails of the forest that surrounded his town, and that only made the fear settle deeper into his gut. The third night marked a turning point. As he lay in bed, frozen with fear, the shadow stretched toward him, gradually inching closer, creeping across the wooden floor like a malevolent fog. Oliver held his breath, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. What was this? Was it truly something evil, or just his overactive imagination? He felt an oppressive weight settling in the room, making it hard to breathe. Was it fear or something more sinister? He closed his eyes, hoping that it would disappear, but he could feel the darkness looming nearer, a putrid presence wrapping around him like a shroud. Oliver's sense of safety melted away, replaced with a swirling vortex of dread. He didn't sleep well that night, plagued by nightmares of unholy figures and sinister whispers. He dreamed of dark forests filled with trees that twisted high above him, their branches clawing at the sky as shadows danced wickedly among them. The morning light brought a fleeting sense of hope, yet the shadow's continuous expansion loomed in his thoughts like a thick fog that refused to lift. He woke up feeling exhausted, his body heavy with the weight of fear. Each encounter with the darkness grew more terrifying than the last, but there was an eerie emptiness in the room when he flipped the light switch, an unsettling calm that was almost mocking. Determined to find answers, Oliver shared his fears with his parents during breakfast. The smell of warm pancakes filled the air, and sunlight poured through the kitchen window, creating a cheerful atmosphere. However, their laughter sliced through his brave attempt to confide in them. They assumed it was just another childhood fear, a figment of his imagination fueled by bedtime stories that often described mystical creatures and adventurous heroes. "There's nothing to worry about, sweetie," his mother said with a smile, brushing his hair back in a comforting gesture. "Monsters aren't real." Yet, Oliver couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was indeed haunting him. That night, he clutched his flashlight tightly, determined not to let fear control him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and deep purples, Oliver prepared for another confrontation with the shadow. He had no idea what it was or what it wanted, but he was tired of living in fear. It was time to uncover the truth. That evening, he made a plan. When the sun finally sank, and the cozy warmth of day surrendered to the cooler shadows of night, he took a deep breath and steeled himself. He grabbed a flashlight from his bedside table and shone it toward the dark patch. For a moment, the light momentarily shrank the amorphous shape, illuminating the edges of the darkness. But soon, it returned, larger than before, pulsating as if it were alive, craving the very light that tried to dispel it. Panic coursed through Oliver's veins as he backed away, his heart racing wildly, wondering what kind of malevolent spirit could be taking shape right in his own room. "I won't let you hide anymore," he shouted, surprising himself with his own bravery. The shadow seemed to flicker, hesitating for a split second, as if contemplating the light that sliced through its gloom. In that moment, he felt a pulse in the room, not just of fear but of defiance. Oliver turned up the brightness of the flashlight, illuminating every inch of his bedroom. He could see his favorite toys lined up perfectly on the shelf, the cozy bedspread with pictures of stars and moons, and the little drawings he had stuck on the walls. Everything looked normal, yet the shadow quivered, a reminder that something was still there. Taking a cautious step forward, he demanded, "What do you want?" His voice was clear, growing stronger with every word. The shadow shifted slightly, almost like a breath struggling to form words. Suddenly, Oliver remembered a bedtime story his father had told him about a lost spirit. "Maybe you're just lonely," he said softly, trying to understand. The room fell silent, save for the soft rustling of the leaves outside. The shadow stopped moving entirely, as if it were listening. "If you're lost, I can help," Oliver continued, surprised at how calm he felt. "But you have to show me." As if in response, the shadow seemed to soften, its harsh edges fading slightly. Oliver watched in awe as tendrils of darkness curled back, revealing a silvery light shimmering at its center. It was beautiful yet eerie, a mix of shadow and glow, pulling at his curiosity. Could this shadow truly be something other than a monster? With a brave heart, Oliver took another step forward and extended the flashlight toward the shimmering light within the shadow. "I'm not afraid of you. Let's be friends." At that moment, the shadow rippled, and Oliver could feel a strange connection forming. It was then he realized, shadows didn't just exist to scare people. Perhaps, they also wanted to be seen and understood. And so, with the moon hanging high in the sky, illuminating his struggle, Oliver embarked on a journey to connect with the unknown, ready to dive deeper into the mystery that was growing right before him. In that quiet, little room, filled with whispers of forgotten tales and dreams, a new adventure was just beginning. The shadow may have brought fear, but perhaps, it could also lead Oliver to something extraordinary. Little did he know that this was just the first step into a much larger world that awaited him, one filled with secrets, shadows, and light. Over the next few nights, the darkness transformed for Oliver. It went from being just a looming shadow in the corners of his room to a suffocating presence that pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. His sleep became more restless. It was almost as if the darkness had a mind of its own, creeping into his dreams, turning them into nightmares that made his heart race and his breath quicken. Whenever he closed his eyes, it felt like slipping into an endless abyss where horrible creatures waited to pounce on him the minute the lights went out. The corners of his room that used to feel safe now felt like they were hiding something sinister. Each night, the creeping darkness swallowed a little more light, a ravenous beast hungry for his fear. He felt as if he were becoming part of the shadows, as if they were wrapping themselves around him while he lay helpless in bed. The air grew colder, and the shadows felt longer as they stretched across the walls, invading the tiniest spaces around him. It became more and more difficult for Oliver to breathe, as if the very air in his room had thickened, making it feel heavy like a weight pressing against his chest. Oliver's fear bloomed into a heavy anxiety that hung over him like a storm cloud. It disrupted his days, filling his thoughts with images of the encroaching shadow. At school, he found it very hard to concentrate on lessons, and his mind would wander back to the dark imprisonment waiting for him at home. Every glance from his classmates made him jump as he worried that they could sense the sinister shadow coiling around him. It felt like a tight rope around his throat, with each tug of anxiety drawing him closer to despair. They whispered behind his back, and those whispered words twisted inside his head like a haunting melody. "What if it comes for you next?" echoed around him, making him feel small and vulnerable. His parents began to notice that he was acting strange. Once a vibrant and cheerful boy, Oliver now seemed like a shadow of himself. They found him crouched in dark corners of the house, whispering to himself. The words sounded strange to them, guttural and twisted as if they were from an ancient language, one that sent a chill down their backs. Even when they called out to him, he didn't seem to hear them, lost in his very own world of shadows and whispers. They dismissed it as a phase, just another quirky part of growing up. But deep inside, Oliver craved their concern, an echo of warmth that would let him know he wasn't alone. He wished more than anything for someone to see the darkness that plagued him, to understand that the fear that gripped him day and night was as real as the ground beneath his feet. On particularly hard nights, Oliver would gaze at the edges of his dimly lit room, where the shadows seemed to come alive, dancing and twisting in ways that both terrified and fascinated him. He tried to find comfort in his favorite toys, but even they felt ordinary when compared to the dark age that hung in his mind. Books that once whisked him away to magical lands did little to help. The creatures that he used to adore now seemed to blend with the shadows. The golden sun that rose each morning soon felt like a cruel reminder of another day spent battling terror. Each tick of the clock echoed loudly in his ears as the hour of sleep approached, sending him deeper into panic. That one night, as the wind howled outside and the curtains billowed softly, Oliver's room felt impossibly heavy. He sat on his bed, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He stared at the crawling blackness as it consumed the last bits of light. Shadows shifted and flickered, and he tried to breathe deeply to calm his racing heart, but the terror was too strong. It felt like icy fingers were wrapping around his throat, making it hard to breathe. Every time he thought he could calm down, the weight of dread pressed harder against him, squeezing his chest. Finally, it happened. As his eyelids grew heavy with fatigue, he sensed the shadow creep closer than ever before. It didn't just linger in the corner anymore. It reached toward him, looming over his bed like the jagged appendages of a monstrous creature. A frozen wave of fear washed over him as he felt a blast of cold air clawing at his skin, a chilling grip that left him shivering. He stammered, unable to scream or even move, frozen in place by the sheer terror as the shadow pulled him closer. In that terrifying moment, Oliver felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around his ankle, drawing him down into the ominous abyss that lay beneath his bed. Panic surged through him like a tidal wave as he grappled with the edge of the mattress, his fingers clinging to the fabric as if it were a lifeline. But it was no use, the darkness was too strong. He could feel the cold tendrils wrapping around him, pulling him into the shadow's grip. It was something he could neither fight nor escape. It felt like being devoured slowly, piece by piece. A numbing sensation spread through his body, overwhelming his senses. The line between reality and nightmare blurred into a swirling fog. He was pulled deeper into the darkness, engulfed by a realm that smelled of rotten leaves and decay, a sickly sweet odor that curled his stomach and made him want to gag. Shapes twisted and writhed in the void around him. Amorphous figures with hollow eyes and jagged teeth loomed in the darkness, their grotesque forms flickering like bad dreams that refused to fade. They whispered in hollow, guttural tones that echoed an eerie, sinister melody, sending uncontrollable shivers racing down his spine. Whatever the words were, they resonated with twisted malice and insatiable hunger. No matter how much he screamed, no one would come to rescue him. The bedroom above continued in unaware bliss, his parents obliviously going about their routines, far removed from the unspeakable terror that had consumed their son. In the depths of the dark realm, shadows released a chorus of laughter, a demoniac sound that echoed through the void, mocking him, laughing at his despair as they feasted upon his fear. It was a haunting act that surrounded him, and Oliver felt utterly alone. Inside this suffocating darkness, a sense of unfathomable dread enveloped him, wrapping tighter around him than the hands that had seized him. He drifted far from his room, lost within a twisted landscape of eternal gloom. There were no walls, no ceiling, just an unending expanse of blackness that felt alive, pulsating with an energy he could not comprehend. With each heartbeat, thump, 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 the malevolence intensified, as if feeding off his racing fear. And Oliver understood that each heartbeat pulled him deeper from the comforting light, drawing him further into something ancient, something vile and sinister. Fantasies of rescue flickered through his mind, images of his parents rushing in to save him, bursting through the door with a bright light that would chase away the darkness. But any glimmer of hope rapidly faded, snuffed out by the all-consuming void that threatened to swallow him whole. He realized, in this moment of screaming terror, that there might be no escape. The shadows had no intention of letting him go. They reveled in his fear, coaxing it out of him like a chef extracting juice from a ripe fruit. The more he struggled, the more they constricted him, a grotesque serpent coiling tighter and tighter around its prey, tasting victory with every breath he took. As the shadowy figures sneered at him, Oliver's heart raced, pounding violently against his ribcage. He closed his eyes tightly, wishing with every fiber of his being that this was just a bad dream. If he could just wake up, then everything would be normal again. But no matter how tightly he squeezed his eyes shut or how much he tried to wake up, he remained trapped, suffocating in the depths of his own terror. But as moments turned to what felt like hours, he realized something profound. Perhaps every monster had a weakness. Every creature of the dark that thrived off fear could also be confronted. If he could find the courage buried deep within him, maybe he could push back against the darkness. Just maybe, there was a spark of light in him yet. The battle was on, and Oliver was determined to fight, no matter how suffocating the shadow felt. Even in the deepest depths of despair, shadows could be fought, and the faint glimmer of hope was always worth searching for. Time seemed to drift away like a forgotten dream as Oliver descended deeper into the enveloping darkness. He felt as if the world around him was spinning wildly, while he himself was stuck, helplessly trapped in a cold grip of dread that squeezed at his mind. The shadows whispered around him like lost voices, echoing secrets of despair and abandonment. Their chilling words suggested that giving in might bring him peace, as if welcoming him into an empty void where his fears could no longer find him. But oh, how fiercely he resisted. He fought with every last bit of strength he had, summoning all his courage to push back against the smothering darkness. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, the haunting pull of the unknown was too strong. The whispers continued their eerie serenade, reminding him of every single fear he had carried within him like heavy stones in his backpack. Each fear pressed down on him, adding to the weight of loneliness that seemed to shatter his spirit into countless pieces. His heart raced, and every beat felt like a battle cry against the creeping shadow that loomed ever closer. Was he destined to wander this maze of fear and sorrow forever? Would he ever find a way back to the light? The shadows moved like hungry ghosts, catching every trace of his terror and feeding off it, growing stronger as they tightened their grip. Strange, twisted shapes darted around him, flitting in and out of his vision like dark fish swimming through an ocean of despair. Each time he caught a glimpse of their grotesque forms, a chill ran down his spine, reminding him of the steep cliffs of worry he faced. Was there no refuge from this torment? The fear had formed a monstrous creature within him, with claws that threatened to shred his hope apart, little by little. In that oppressive dark, Oliver had an unsettling realization. There seemed to be no help in sight, no friendly voice calling him back to safety. As he took a shaky breath, the laughter of the shadows rang in his ears like a haunting melody, twisting the air around him. It was a cruel sound, like echoes of a haunted playground where no children played. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to block it out, but it only grew louder, forcing him to confront the insecurities he buried deep inside. With each passing moment, he felt his heart beginning to slow, as if it too were succumbing to the overwhelming weight of despair. The darkness swirled around him like a dark cloud, pressing closer and closer until it nearly suffocated him, stealing every last glimmer of warmth and light he had ever held dear. He longed to feel the sun on his face or to hear his mother's sweet laughter, but those memories felt like faint stars lost in a stormy sky, barely visible and always out of reach. How had it come to this? How did he allow the shadows to creep so close? As he stood there, trembling, forms began to materialize from the abyss. Faces emerged out of the dark with twisted grins that flickered in and out like dying flames. They seemed to glow with wicked delight, a ghastly reflection of his own fears personified. Their hollow eyes bored into his very soul, drinking in his despair and filling him with icy dread. If only he could somehow generate a spark of defiance, he thought. But the laughter around him only grew louder, ringing in his ears, each echo feeling like a dagger that pierced his heart. "Help me," he whimpered softly, his voice barely a whisper, vanishing into the depths of the shadowy realm. In that moment, when despair threatened to swallow him whole, Oliver stumbled upon a flicker of rebellion tucked away within him, like a tiny seed buried deep in frost. But before he could nurture it, the dread surged back, crashing over him like angry waves against a crumbling cliff. What could he do? The darkness was pulling him closer with every passing moment, curling around him like a slithering serpent, offering false promises of comfort at the cost of his very essence. It felt so tempting to simply let go and succumb to the nothingness. He thought of his mother's gentle laughter, the way it would dance around him like a warm breeze, or his father's reassuring bare hugs that made him feel safe and cared for. These cherished memories flickered like flickering candles on a stormy night, just out of reach and almost forgotten, smothered by the cold and heavy darkness that surrounded him. The shadows seemed to mock his attempts to hold on to those precious moments, whispering seductively in his ear, "What good are they now? You can forget them, and we can keep you safe." Finally, just when Oliver felt the last bits of resistance slip away, he surrendered. The cold shadow enfolded him completely, like a dark cloak that wrapped tightly around his body. It pulled him backward, deeper into the endless void, where hopes and dreams faded into mere shadows. Just before the darkness consumed him entirely, Oliver felt a fragile whisper escape his lips, "I'm sorry." It was a small and tiny sound that seemed to fade into the immense silence. As he floated further away from reality, he could feel himself becoming one with the shadows, as if he were melting away into the nothingness that lay before him. The ominous presence around him relished this moment, feeding on his very essence, binding him to its depth in a prison of despair. Each trace of who he had been seemed to unravel, losing its brightness and turning into whispers of forgotten hopes. The shadows grew louder now, their laughter turning into a screeching cacophony that resonated deep within his mind. He could feel their joy, vivid and sinister, as they enfolded him tighter. Each moment felt longer than the last, stretching time into an eternity of darkness. Oliver was lost now, floating in a realm that felt so far removed from everything he had ever known. In this dreadful embrace, he could sense the heartbeat of the shadows surrounding him, thumping like a drum, rhythmic and relentless. It was as if he had entered a different world altogether, one where the very essence of light was banished forever. He remembered the sunbeams that would warm his skin on bright summer days, the fragrant flowers blooming in the gardens of his childhood, and the laughter that echoed like music in his heart. Now all of that seemed like old stories someone had told him long ago, distant memories wrapped in layers of dust, fading and forgotten. Then suddenly, amidst the chaos, a memory emerged from within him, a soft smile, bright eyes, and laughter that felt like music. It was like a gentle touch in the cold darkness. It reminded him of family picnics, of running through golden fields, of everyone playing together under the wide open sky. The feeling surged forward, a warmth that fought against the chill creeping into his soul. Could it be that amidst the despair, there was still a flicker of light? Oliver clung to that memory. He focused on the image of his family. The love they shared felt like a lifebuoy thrown into a raging ocean. Could he pull himself back? Could he find a way out of this consuming gloom? He poured all his energy into remembering those moments of pure happiness, the ones that made his heart soar like a kite caught in the wind. He would fight to keep them alive. The shadows raged around him, angry at this sudden spark of life, threatening to snuff it out before it could fully ignite. But he pressed on, gathering fragments of laughter and joy until they intertwined, forming a brilliant tapestry that glowed against the darkness. This was his story, and he wouldn't let it be erased. With newfound strength, he began to resist the darkness tugging at him. No more. He shouted into the void, his voice rising above the shadow's cacophony. I will not be a victim. I am not just fear. I will remember my joy. Oliver took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his memories course through him like a river breaking free. The laughter of his family echoed in the darkness, filling him with courage. He could almost see the sun breaking through the heavy clouds. The shadows screamed in fury, but Oliver knew this was his moment to rise. He envisioned the faces of his loved ones, the vibrant flowers, the laughter ringing out in a joyous symphony. The warmth expanded within him, pushing outward, chasing the darkness away. The grip of fear began to loosen, melting like ice under the bright sun. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he could breathe deeply, inhaling hope. The darkness thrashed around him, angry shadows retreating into the corners, trying to escape the brilliant light he was igniting within himself. Oliver held on tight to the love and joy that had once filled his heart, and as he did so, he felt himself growing stronger. No longer was he just a whisper lost in despair, he was a bright flame igniting a path back to freedom. The laughter around him shifted, turning from cruel taunts to fading echoes, and quietly began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. And then, like the first light of dawn breaking upon the horizon, Oliver took a step forward, ready to embrace the light. It felt warm and inviting, a radiant glow that promised safety, love, and hope. I'm not lost, he declared with newfound resolve. I will find my way back. The words rang out confidently, slicing through the shadows as the light fought to reclaim what was rightfully his. In that shimmering moment, everything changed. A bright tapestry of memories unfolded before him, beckoning him to follow where it led. As he moved toward the light, the shadows began to fall away, shriveling into nothingness. Oliver could feel every step chasing away the darkness, chasing away everything that had once threatened to consume him. Each stride filled him with purpose, determination, and a heart bursting with joy. The shadows still tried to cling to him, lingering on the edges, but with each stride forward, they lost their power. Oliver pressed on until, finally, the last traces of the chilling nightmares faded into oblivion, leaving behind only the promise of dawn. He stepped into a golden light, feeling warmth envelop him, wrapping him in its sweet embrace, a feeling of home after a long, arduous journey. In that moment, he realized he had transformed, emerging from the dark space he had once been swallowed by. With his heart now full of love, courage, and the light of memory, he knew he could face anything that lay ahead. He was Oliver, and he was more than his fears. He had embraced the light within him, and it would guide him to places far brighter than the darkness he had just escaped. With joy swelling in his heart, he could finally whisper the words he had longed for, I'm not lost anymore. And it was true, he had found his way back. Morning came with the same mundane routine that the town had known for many years. The sun poured its golden rays over the rooftops, warming the streets and turning dew-dappled grass into radiant green carpets. But this time, it felt different. The sunlight bathed everything in brightness, while inside one small house, an invisible horror loomed, hiding in the darkest corners. The world outside was cheerful and lively, but within those four walls, something was terribly wrong. Oliver's parents were consumed with worry as each day passed without a word from their beloved son. He had always been a vibrant child, full of laughter and joy, with a contagious spirit that filled every room he entered. But now, the emptiness felt heavy, like a thick blanket draped over their hearts. His toys lay untouched, sprawled across the living room floor. The colorful blocks he loved to stack were scattered with no fingers to rearrange them. The bright illustrations in his schoolbooks remained unturned, the pages dusty and forgotten in the corners of his room. The joy that would echo through the house was replaced by an unsettling silence that gnawed at their hearts like hungry mice. Desperate to uncover the truth, Oliver's parents searched tirelessly in the woods that surrounded their home. They called out his name, hoping to hear his laughter bounce back from the trees. Each rustle of leaves or snap of a branch heightened their alarm, making their hearts race with worry. They concocted countless plausible scenarios, their minds swirling with fears and nightmares. Was he hurt? Did he run away on some grand adventure? Or was he lost somewhere in the vast wilderness? With each passing day, the reality sunk deeper like a cold stone in their stomachs, filling them with dread as the shadows grew longer in the evening light. Inside Oliver's room, another sinister presence watched. The patch of darkness that had joined them during his absence began to expand, creeping further into the corners like a shadowy mist. It reveled in the absence of light and warmth, a malevolent force feeding hungrily off the sorrow and grief that enveloped the space. The air in the room became thick and stale, hanging heavy with an uncomfortable aura that whispered of abandonment and despair. Weeks turned into an endless cycle of worry, marking the walls with the tale of loss. The once vibrant colors of Oliver's room faded, now only a dull echo of a time when joy lived there. As the moon rose and shadows deepened, stories began to bubble up among the townsfolk. Whispers floated from person to person, like leaves carried by an unseen wind. Some claimed to have seen flickers of movement in the windows at night, shadowy shapes darting just out of sight, teasing the eyes. Others spoke of disembodied laughter that floated through the trees, chilling their bones and raising goosebumps on their skin. As tales grew darker and more fantastic, a blanket of dread settled over the town, turning neighbors into wary strangers. Families, gripped by fear, began to pack their belongings and leave, seeking shelter far from the haunted house where the whispers etched their warnings into the night. Meanwhile, Oliver's parents fought against the wave of despair that threatened to drown them. They remained tragically optimistic, steadfast in their belief that their son would return home, just like he always had before. Their love kept a flickering light alive in his room, a single lamp glowing softly in the ever-increasing darkness. They would sit beside that timid flame, whispering words of hope into the night air, their voices rising and falling like the gentle waves of an ocean. Yet, as the days stretched on endlessly, the shadows began to inch closer to the threshold of the room, their grip tightening with every passing hour. The warmth of laughter faded, swallowed by an oppressive cold that wrapped around the house like a chilling embrace. Time marched on, and soon it became a blur. The town moved on, oblivious to the lingering sorrow that dwelled in that one lonely house. Oliver's name faded into whispers and half-remembered dreams, drifting into the crevices of memory until it nearly disappeared altogether. Meanwhile, the darkness spread like ink spilled across a page, consuming everything it touched. It whispered eerie secrets that only it could understand, laughing silently at the confusion and sadness it caused. In the heart of this growing blackness, Oliver was still there, but he was transformed. No longer the joyous boy he once was, he now stood trapped like a butterfly caught in a web. His essence dimmed, becoming a shadow of his former self, a vessel of anguish, perpetually maintained by an insatiable fear that clawed at his spirit. As the darkness swallowed more of the room, the flicker of Oliver's spirit grew dimmer, fighting against the ever-tightening grasp of the malevolent entity. He remained like a distant whisper, an echo of the boy who had laughed and loved, now reduced to a pawn in a dark game played by the insidious force that thrived on despair and sorrow. Silence fell heavy over the house, sparking a haunting lullaby that reverberated through the air, an unsettling reminder to anyone who ventured close. Some shadows were alive and ever hungry. Through the windows, the sun cast rays of light that danced across the dusty floor. Yet, as if they sensed the somber longing held within the house, these rays would bend and twist, casting strange shapes on the walls that flickered like visions in a dream. Outside, life continued in the town. Children played in parks, their laughter ringing out like chimes in the breeze, a stark contrast to the lost silence that surrounded Oliver's home. They climbed trees, made wildflower crowns, and chased butterflies, their carefree spirits unaware of the looming darkness that crept along the edges of their world. But inside, echoes of Oliver's laughter faded into the gloom, leaving only a haunting silence, thick and suffocating. The room grew colder, every corner draped in the creeping chill of abandonment. His parents still clung to their hope, their hearts heavy with longing, but as days turned into weeks, the shadows whispered their secrets to the stillness that enveloped them. They sat in the dim light, reminiscing about their son, telling tales of his grand adventures, his sweet laughter, and the joy he brought into their lives. Yet, the darkness listened intently, ready to ensnare them as it had taken their boy. With every flicker of the light, every chirp of the crickets outside, the darkness welled up with anticipation. The house grew more desolate, filled with a weighty sadness that pressed down with 1,000 invisible hands. It lingered like a haunting melody that no one could forget. In time, Those who remained would recount the dreadful stories of the forsaken house, tales meant to keep children from wandering too close, warned of the shadows that preyed upon the unsuspecting. Gradually, the house stood abandoned, a cursed monument to loss. The windows cracked and the doors creaked ominously in the wind. It became a place of whispered legends, a reminder of what was once a lively home now left in darkness. With every flicker of hope extinguished, the shadows grew larger, consuming the light that dared enter. In the swirling darkness, Oliver became an unrecognizable figure, trapped in a chess game he could not win, lost in the depths of a memory of laughter that echoed faintly in the corners of his mind. Eventually, the town moved on, forgetting the boy who was swallowed by the shadows. Families built new homes, began new traditions, and the memory of Oliver settled like dust in the wind, whispering tales of a lost child that faded into oblivion. The darkness remained in that house, patient and ever hungry, waiting for its next unwitting victim to fall into its abyss. It licked its lips with anticipation, craving more souls to feed its insatiable hunger for despair. Oliver's legacy became a ghostly reminder of the joy that had once flourished like wildflowers in the sun. The shadows continued to creep, spreading with each flicker of the lights that faltered. They became a chilling testimony to vulnerability, forever marked by the memory of a boy who had disappeared into the depths of a forgotten, creeping darkness. And so, the house stood, shrouded in silence, a mere echo of life, held captive by the lingering shadow that thrived on lost dreams and broken hearts.